Let's speak to Alfie Stirling, who's Head of Economics at the New Economics Foundation. Alfie, hello to you.
Hi there, good afternoon.
I feel we've been waiting for this announcement about the self-employed for days now, and there was a flurry of announcements from Number 10 and the Chancellor and the like, early days, and nothing so far on this. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. It's a concern. It's a worry. I mean, I think the big announcement we had end of last week, I think it was now, on the really quite significant interventions for employees was incredibly welcome. This job retention scheme that will protect 80% of earnings for those who no longer have a job as a result of the self-isolation, self-distancing measures that are being introduced. But as you said, the big gap is self-employed. Now, we're told, or I should say, actually, that's the big gap for current workers. There are other gaps, actually, in terms of people that have already lost their jobs or who are already reliant on the safety net, which probably comes to that. But for people who currently have work, self-employed are the big gap. And, the worry now is just the speed at which these things can be implemented, because even with employees, the job retention system won't be fully operational until the end of April. So it's still, a full month away. For self-employed, it's really about design, and clearly they're trying to find a solution, they being government. We think that they should be looking at last year's tax returns and basing a payment off the back of that.
Sure.
Yeah. They're clearly having troubles, but I think the bottom line to all of this is we went into this recession, into this pandemic, with an incredibly weak social security system. Our safety net was threadbare and had huge holes in it, and that's partly why we're playing catch up now and trying to do these things in real time. And one of the key messages from all this, I know it's kind of difficult to think about, the future, but it will be critical to make sure that our safety net is never again left in this situation again.
Alfie, as I understand it, I mean, I think you just alluded to it then, the government is still working out the logistics of how it gets to pay this 80% bailout to employed people. So getting money to the self-employed, which sounds to me, if they're going to examine tax returns, is going to be a real bureaucratic nightmare. That's a long way away. So given that this could be weeks and weeks, people could fall into real hardship before they see any cash.
I agree. And if you look at other countries, they try to take shortcuts with, for example, Ireland have created a flat payment for self-employed, I think about €350 a week. I think that the quickest way to address this would actually be to increase the generosity of all existing benefit payments and to remove the current means testing for a temporary period. So you could treble sick pay, you could treble the main element of universal credit, you could treble job seekers allowance, and that will create a safety net that will catch everyone at a value of about £1,000 a month. That would be relatively quickly to do. You could do that in days rather than weeks or months, and that would mean if you did that as a first step, that would make a huge impact for people's lives who are then leaning on these benefits, whether they're self-employed or otherwise. Then it gives you a bit of breathing space and try and have a better bespoke system for people who have lost a significant portion of income from self-employment. But at least the safety net will be that much more protective immediately. Yeah,
I think it's something like a third of the nation have only got about £100 savings.
Yes.
So we are, unless the government gets this right, both for employed people and self-employed, and indeed people on benefits, there's a chance that millions of people could fall into a sort of cashless abyss, isn't there?
And that's precisely why this is the number one priority for economic policy at the moment, because, if you like, the economy has been, we've deliberately created this recession. It's not that I'm not saying there was any other choice or there was a better option, but it is a deliberately created recession in order to protect ourselves from a public health emergency, and the crisis in people's incomes because they can't work, and government has to step in and address that. I mean, I'd say there's one other group that doesn't often get talked about beyond those that are already on benefits, beyond those self-employed, and that is people currently in work, in employment, standard contracts, who will see a drop in hours as a result, because the job retention scheme only protects people if their entire job becomes redundant.
True.
if it's just a drop in hours, so people could be getting a 50-60% cut in hours and therefore commensurate cut in pay, and they're not protected.
What's interesting about, I mean, whether we call this a kind of rewiring or recalibration of the system or just the way we do business as human beings. I mean, there seems to be a polarized view on this, and I don't know what you think, Alfie. Many suggesting it'll be like 2008, where we learn nothing afterwards. We just go back to doing what we did with all the same practices that got us there in the first place. The other school of thought, of course, is that in fact it will be a hard lesson learned, but in fact it could be in some respects good that the obsession with growth is slightly diluted in some respects, but and others would say, well, actually it could mean things like companies realizing they don't need as many staff. It could be companies realizing they don't need staff for as many hours, etc.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really massive question, and trying to speculate on what are going to be the long-term changes to society, and I think they really could be massive and come in all sorts of directions. I mean, as you said, it could be in kind of employment preferences, but it also could be in things like, how we talk to each other and how we feel close to people. Is it physical proximity, or do we now all go on Zoom and Skype the whole time? And, there are all sorts of things we're not going to know the answer to. But I think there are probably 2 points I'd make. One is that we tend to prepare ourselves to fight the last crisis. So we spent a lot of time over the last 10 years really strengthening the financial system and the banks and making sure they had protection for another financial crisis. Totally neglected the welfare state. We completely neglected the safety net, and that is why we're now having the problems we are, or it's a big part of the reason why we're having the huge problems we are now. I hope that coming out of this, we then address the social safety net. Of course, there's no guarantee that the next crisis, when it comes along 10 years down the line, will be a crisis in the safety net. But I think being able to learn at least to make the areas of the system that are exposed for vulnerability in this period of upheaval have to be corrected for next time.
It's interesting because an area that's always fascinated me for many years is the whole universal basic income discussion, and essentially that is what is being practiced right now.
Well, it is, except with, of course, the caveat being what we started the conversation around, which is these big gaps.
Yeah.
So there is no...
And the fact that nobody's got any money yet.
Well, and no one's received it. I mean, that's why I think... I mean, on universal basic income, my worry with... my 2 worries of it right now are, if you try and create a whole new scheme from nothing, that tends to be more complicated, more difficult, more fraught with error than just trying to strengthen existing systems, however imperfect they might be. So my one worry would be about the practicality of it and the workability of it. The other would be, it's so important that we improve our safety net for the long term, not just for this particular moment. And if we create a temporary, pandemic payment or basic income, whatever it might be, it's very easy to just cut it off and return to business as usual afterwards, even if it was successful for this period. So I think the answer, both for long term and the short term practicality of it, has to be around strengthening the current safety net. And you can create a payment very much like a basic income, in the sense that it is non-conditional, it's generous enough to live on. And do that for this period by trebling current benefits and by removing the means testing and the 5-week wait to go on to benefits. So you can do this through the existing benefit system if the political will is there.
Alfie, I think that the thing about government departments is they're kind of hardwired towards stopping people conning them, false claims, fraudulent claims. But that's what governments do. They try to prevent being conned by members of the public. I think they've got to drop that attitude for now and just risk being conned by some people for the greater good of the majority of people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think 2 kind of biases, if you like, have shaped the response. So one probably is that. It's around not trying to, make sure we have a really wide net and catch everyone because they're worried about giving money to, quote unquote, the wrong people, whoever the wrong people might be at this time. I think everyone's suffering, to be honest. It's hard to give money to the wrong people. Right, I think you're right, that's one bias. Another bias is I think they've tried to shape the response by preserving the type of economy that is valued at the moment by the current government. So it's very conspicuous that the initial response was about giving businesses cash on the hope that they would then keep workers and pay workers. So they initially tried to rely on grants and loans to the business. When that didn't work, they then reluctantly moved to a new phase of directly subsidising workers. And of course, in effect, they were just doing what they initially hoped, which is that businesses would stay afloat and keep paying their workers. When that didn't happen, they had to step in more directly. But that reveals, and that was lost time. And as we know, people have lost their jobs while the government has shifted its response. But I think that reveals another bias, which was that there was a trust in businesses to do the right thing. Many have. Hopefully, many more will do now. But and in fact, even in the job retention scheme, it is not. Businesses are not obliged to keep on their workers in order to be a member of the scheme. And that's something again which is this bias was putting business first, trusting their interests first before workers. And I think that's another problem with the response as well.